The Galaxy Intersection Point Space Station X-12 was not a place for the faint of heart. A sprawling, chaotic hub of interstellar commerce and diplomacy, it housed species from across the known universe. Some towered like walking gemstone mountains. Others floated as wispy energy beings that crackled with every emotional fluctuation. There were crystalline collectives that communicated through light patterns, gaseous entities that required specialized containment fields, and everything imaginable in between. And then, of course, there were the Cthar. The massive, diamond-scaled reptilians were the undisputed apex predators of the quadrant. Their species had evolved on a world that would kill most sentients within minutes, developing strength, speed, and ruthlessness unmatched by any, but I always felt there had to be more out there. More to learn, more to discover, more ways of thinking and being that humans had never even imagined. She gazed out at the nebula. I saved up for years to buy that little transport ship. Everyone thought I was crazy. Humans don't just wander into deep space, they said. You'll never survive out there. Xyler made a sound that might have been amusement. They weren't entirely wrong about the survival odds. True, Alara laughed. If I'd landed anywhere but here, if you hadn't been the one to find me. She shrugged. But sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be. A surprisingly mystical perspective from someone who recalibrated our filtration systems using what you called basic engineering principles, Xyler observed. The more I learn about the universe, the more I realize that the practical and the mystical aren't as separate as we think. She turned to face him fully, like a tiny human and a massive Cthar becoming family. Xyler's scales rippled in what she now recognized as pleased embarrassment. The term little brother has caused quite the diplomatic incident among my people, he admitted. The Cthar High Command has requested a formal explanation. Oh no, Alara winced. Am I getting you in trouble? On the contrary, Xyler rumbled, a hint of defiance in his voice. I submitted the full report of your actions during the Nebula crisis. The High Command is gone, unusually quiet. I believe they are reassessing certain long-held assumptions about other species. Well, that's something, Alara grinned. Then, more seriously, thank you, Xyler, for seeing me. Not just a small, fragile human, but me. The massive security chief was silent for a long moment, looking out at the stars. Finally, he spoke, his deep voice unusually soft. Our culture values strength above all else. We are taught from hatching that size and power determine worth. He looked down at her. You have forced me to reconsider what strength truly means. Alara felt unexpected tears welling in her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, knowing Xyler would be uncomfortable with such an emotional display. Instead, she lightly bumped her fist against his massive scaled arm, a gesture that had become their own unique form of affection. So, she said, deliberately lightening the tone, what dangerous, possibly universe-threatening adventure should we tackle next? Xyler made the rumbling sound she now recognized as his laugh. JNIS has detected unusual energy patterns from the quantum fold near the Helix cluster. Director Thaxel has requested your creative input. Ooh, quantum weirdness. Alara's eyes lit up with excitement. When do we start? The briefing is scheduled for tomorrow. Xyler's permanent scowl softened into what was, for him, practically a smile. Try not to solve the mystery before the meeting begins. As they turned to leave the observation lounge, an odd ping sounded from Alara's pocket, the Valerian crystal activating unexpectedly. At the same moment, the lights in the lounge dimmed briefly, and both of them could have sworn they felt a gentle ripple pass through the station, like the echo of a distant cosmic event. Did you feel that? Alara asked, pulling out the crystal, which was glowing with patterns she'd never seen before. Yes, Xyler confirmed, instantly alert, his security training taking over. JNIS station-wide scan. Report any anomalies. After a brief pause, the AI responded. No structural or systems anomalies detected. However, quantum fluctuation readings are interesting. There appears to have been a momentary phase alignment between multiple dimensional layers. Alara and Xyler exchanged glances. That sounds like a tomorrow problem, Ilera suggested hopefully. Xyla made a sound that was half growl, half sigh. It would appear that the universe is not finished with us yet, little brother. Good, Ilera replied with an adventurous grin. I was worried we might get bored. As they walked together through the corridors of X-12, the massive, fearsome apex predator and the tiny, brilliant human he called little brother. Beings of all species stepped aside, watching with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and growing respect. For in this unlikely friendship, they saw something both ancient and new, a reminder that in a vast and often dangerous universe, true strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones no one could have predicted. The station continued its eternal orbit, a shining beacon of cooperation amid the stars, while the whispering nebula glowed peacefully in the distance. Both forever changed by the smallest species in the room and the apex predator who had seen her true worth. The most specialized combat species. Even among this fearsome race, Xyler stood apart. His scales were darker, his eyes more piercing, and his permanent scowl more terrifying than most. As head of security for X-12, Xyler's very presence was enough to make even the bravest species think twice about causing trouble. Which is why the entire docking bay fell into stunned silence when the unauthorized transport ship's door hissed open to reveal not a terrifying threat, but a single human. She stood barely knee-high to Xyler, with a wildly oversized backpack that seemed to contain more items than should be physically possible. Her bright eyes scanned the crowded bay, taking in the bewildering array of aliens before landing on the imposing form of Xyler. Rather than cowering, the expected and sensible reaction, she smiled. A wide, completely unfazed grin. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Several species that could accidentally swallow the human whole chuckled. One floating crystalline entity actually dimmed its lights in what could only be the equivalent of rolling its eyes. Interesting, the station's AI-JNIS, Judicial and Navigational Interface System, observed through a nearby speaker, its mildly sardonic tone perfectly calibrated. An unauthorized landing in a species with no environmental protection on a station designed for approximately 817 different atmospheric needs, none of which are Earth standard. My threat assessment routines are positively buzzing with confusion. Xyler's shadow engulfed the tiny human as he approached, each step causing minor tremors on the dock. His scales shifted slightly, catching the light as his massive form loomed over her. The human smile didn't falter. Identification, Xyler rumbled, the single word reverberating through the bay like distant thunder. I'm Ilera, the human replied cheerfully, as if this explained everything. When Xyler's scowl deepened, a feat many had thought impossible, she added, "Oh, you probably want the official stuff." She began rummaging through her enormous backpack, pulling out odd devices, tools, and what appeared to be a collection of small, colorful rocks before finally producing a worn identification chip. "Here you go. I think it's still valid." "Probably." Xyler's Talon dwarfed the chip as he took it and inserted it into a scanner on his wrist. The scanner emitted an immediate blaring sound that made several nearby species cover their auditory organs. "Expired," Xyler growled. 3 rotations ago." His eyes narrowed. No valid authorization for docking. No approved purpose for visitation. He leaned down, bringing his massive face closer to Ilera's. "Humans are classified as a fragile species. X-12 is not designated as suitable for unassisted human habitation." Ilera nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that all sounds right. Very thorough assessment." She looked up at him expectantly, as if waiting for him to realize something obvious. Xyler straightened to his full height, an action that usually preceded someone being marched to the detention cells. The crowd began to disperse, expecting the typical outcome for unauthorized visitors. "I'll just need to impound your vessel and process your—" "Oh, I almost forgot," Ilera interrupted, digging through her pack again. "I brought you something." She pulled out a small object, wrapped in what appeared to be colorful paper. "I heard Thar appreciate tokens of respect, and I'm told you're the best security chief in this sector. It's a fossil from Earth. Really old. About 65 million years, give or take. She extended her hand, offering what was, to her, a substantial object, but what appeared laughably tiny in comparison to Zyler's massive palm. The security chief stared at it, frozen in what could only be described as the Kthar equivalent of utter bafflement. "Jin-S," Zyler finally spoke, addressing the station AI while never taking his eyes off the human. "Complete background verification on this. Ilera. Full security protocol. Already running," the AI replied, a hint of amusement in its synthesized voice. "Though I must say, this is the most interesting security breach we've had since that group of Quatrexian monks accidentally mistook our waste disposal for a sacred meditation chamber. I'm really not a security breach," Ilera offered helpfully. "More of an unexpected opportunity." Zyler's eyes narrowed further. If such a thing were possible. After a long, tense moment, he made a sound somewhere between a growl and a sigh. "The detention cells are not configured for human life support," he said finally. "You will remain under observation until your credentials and purpose can be verified." He gestured toward the exit with one massive talon. "Walk. I will follow." "Great," Ilera chirped, looking genuinely pleased with this arrangement. She tucked the wrapped fossil back in her bag and hoisted it onto her shoulders with surprising strength for her size. "I've been sitting in that transport for ages. A walk would be wonderful," as she strode forward with the confident gait of someone who absolutely belonged there. Zyler found himself experiencing an emotion that his training had never prepared him for, complete and utter confusion. "J-N-I-S," he subvocalized through his neural link to the AI. "Yes, security chief," the AI responded privately. "Make note, possible new security protocol needed for whatever this is." "Noted," J-N-I-S replied, and Zyler could have sworn the AI was laughing at him. "Shall I title it Small Human, Big Problems?" Zyler didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, he followed the tiny, bouncing form of Ilera as she practically skipped through the station corridors, nodding cheerfully at bewildered aliens 10 times her size. For the first time in his career as X-12 security chief, Zyler had the distinct feeling that he wasn't the most dangerous thing in the room. The next cycle on X-12 began with what J-N-I-S would later classify as incident type, entirely predictable yet somehow still surprising. Ilera, despite being assigned quarters under observation and explicit instructions to remain there, had somehow convinced a maintenance drone to give her a tour of the station's commercial district. Zyler found her in the midst of the bustling crystalline sector marketplace, surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers as she enthusiastically examined a vendor's display of dimensional phase shifters. "These are incredible," she was exclaiming to a towering silicon-based life form who looked both confused and flattered by her interest. "On Earth, we're still stuck with linear dimensionality. The best we've managed is theoretical models of higher dimensions, but you're actually manipulating them with pocket-sized tools." The vendor, a quartz-kin merchant named Silax, whose crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns that expressed both caution and intrigue, tilted what passed for their head. "Your species truly inhabits only 3 spatial dimensions? How do you think? That's what I've been wondering about all of you." Ilera laughed. "Our brains evolved to process a very specific set of dimensions, but yours must work in fundamentally different." "Human," Zyler's voice cut through the marketplace chatter like a plasma blade through atmosphere. "You were instructed to remain in your assigned quarters." The crowd parted instantly as the security chief approached. Ilera turned, her face brightening rather than showing appropriate fear. "Zyler, perfect timing. I was just asking about the station's air filtration systems for the crystalline sector. Did you know they use quantum tunneling to—" "You deliberately disobeyed security protocols," Zyler interrupted, his scales darkening slightly, a sign of irritation that sent several nearby beings backing away cautiously. Ilera's expression turned thoughtful. "I suppose technically that's true, but I didn't mean any harm." "The maintenance drone," said the tour, was approved. She glanced at the small floating sphere that hovered nearby, which immediately dimmed its indicator lights and tried to edge away unnoticed. Before Zyler could respond, likely with a roar that would have tested the station's noise-dampening systems, a sharp alarm began blaring throughout the sector. JS's voice followed, unusually urgent. Attention all personnel and residents. Critical malfunction detected in crystalline sector primary atmospheric regulation system. Hazardous particulate levels rising. Emergency protocols engaged. Non-silicon-based life forms should evacuate immediately. Estimated time to dangerous contamination levels, 17 minutes. The market erupted into controlled chaos. Silicon-based life forms like the quartzkin remained calm. The changing atmosphere wouldn't harm them, but all others began moving quickly toward the sector airlocks. Zyler's security training kicked in immediately. JNIS status report. Main control node for the crystalline sector filtration system has experienced a catastrophic failure, the AI responded. Maintenance access is severely compromised. Engineering teams are en route, but the control node is located within a micro-access conduit that even the smallest maintenance drones cannot navigate. Alara, who had been listening intently, suddenly raised her hand as if in a classroom. Excuse me, but what exactly is the problem? In simple terms, JNS seemed almost surprised at being addressed directly by the human. In simple terms, a crucial component that regulates air quality is broken. It's inside a very small tunnel. If it isn't fixed quickly, the approximately 3,742 non-silicon-based beings in this sector will be at risk of respiratory failure. And no one can reach it because the tunnel is too small. Alara clarified, already shrugging off her backpack. Correct, JNIS. Confirmed. The access conduit was designed for specialized micro-repair units, which are currently offline due to the same power surge that damaged the control node. Alara turned to Zyler with an expression that mixed excitement with determination. I can fit in there. The security chief stared at her, momentarily speechless, which gave Alara the opportunity to continue. You were just saying how small and fragile humans are, right? Well, sometimes being small is an advantage. She was already rummaging through her backpack, pulling out what looked like primitive tools. I just need directions to the access point. This is absurd. One of the quartzkin engineers who had arrived on the scene interjected, their crystalline body flashing patterns of disbelief and dismissal. The environmental systems are highly complex. A primitive organic couldn't possibly. I believe, Zyler interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble that silenced the engineer immediately, that we have limited options. He turned to JNIS. Can you guide the human to the access point and provide technical specifications? Affirmative, JNIS replied, though I feel compelled to note that this solution carries approximately 67 significant risks, not least of which is entrusting critical station infrastructure to an unauthorized visitor with no verified technical credentials. Noted, Zyler said grimly. He looked down at Alara, who was now strapping a small light to her forehead and checking what appeared to be a primitive multi-tool. You claim you can do this? I've been crawling through tight spaces and fixing things since I was a kid, Alara said with a confident smile. Lead the way. 5 minutes later, Zyler found himself standing with a group of increasingly anxious engineers beside a small access panel that led into the labyrinthine maintenance system of the crystalline sector. Alara was already halfway into the opening, just her legs and feet visible. The readings from your position indicate you're approaching the first junction, JNIS was saying, its voice echoing slightly in the narrow passage. You'll need to take the left conduit. Be advised that the environmental controls in your section are compromised. Temperature is approximately 15 degrees higher than human comfort levels. Toasty, Alara's voice came back slightly muffled, but manageable. How much farther to the control node? Approximately 30 meters through increasingly narrow passageways. Good thing I had a skinny phase, Alara muttered, wiggling further into the conduit until she disappeared completely from view. Xyler found himself in the unusual position of feeling utterly useless. His size and strength, always his greatest assets, were completely irrelevant in this situation. All he could do was listen to the sporadic updates from JNIS, and Alera's occasional comments and grunts of effort. The particulate levels are continuing to rise. One of the engineers reported, their crystalline form pulsing with patterns that Xyler recognized as extreme concern. We're approaching critical contamination for organic respiratory systems. Xyler activated his neural link. Status, JNS. The human is making surprisingly good progress, the AI responded. Though I'm detecting elevated heart rate and respiratory patterns consistent with significant exertion. Can she reach the control node in time? Calculating. Uncertain. The final approach requires navigating a particularly challenging section where the conduit narrows significantly. Xyler suppressed a growl of frustration. Put me through to her directly. A small click indicated the connection was made. Alera, Xyler said, forcing his naturally intimidating voice to adopt a neutral tone. Report your status. Oh, hey there. Alera's voice came back, breathless but cheerful. Just having a friendly crawl through your air ducts. The view's amazing if you're into industrial maintenance design. I think I'm getting close to the wait. I can see something ahead. Looks like your control node has a pretty serious power regulation issue. Can you fix it? Xyler asked bluntly. There was a pause, filled only with the sound of Alera's movement. Maybe. It's not just a simple repair, though. I think. Yes, I can see the problem. The primary regulator is completely fried, but that's not the real issue. There's a design flaw in the backup systems. They're all connected to the same power conduit, which means when one failed, they all did. One of the engineers made a sound like shattering glass. Impossible. The systems were designed with triple redundancy. Triple redundancy, all using the same power source, isn't real redundancy, Alera replied, her voice now echoing strangely as if she'd entered a slightly larger space. It's like having 3 doors to the same room, but only one key. The particle contamination has reached 80% of critical threshold, another engineer reported. Evacuation is only 63% complete. Alera, Xyler said, an unfamiliar urgency in his voice. Time is critical. I know. I'm working on it. I think I can jury-rig a bypass using... Hold on. There were sounds of metal against metal, followed by what seemed suspiciously like human cursing. Almost got it. Just need to... There! Suddenly, the alarm that had been blaring continuously cut off mid-wail. The engineer's monitoring equipment showed an immediate drop in particulate levels. Partial success, JNIS. Announced. Primary filtration restored at 40% capacity. Contamination levels decreasing. A collective sigh of relief swept through the gathered crowd. Xyler felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest. Something almost like pride, though certainly not directed at the tiny human currently hidden in the station's infrastructure. That should buy us some time. Alera's voice came through, now sounding distinctly strained. But it's only temporary. I need to replace the main regulator entirely, or this will just happen again, possibly worse. Engineering teams can handle that once the immediate crisis is resolved. One of the Quartzkins stated, their crystalline form now pulsing with patterns of reluctant respect. You should exit while the route remains accessible. Actually, Alera replied, I think I can do better than a temporary fix. I just need a few more minutes. There's something else here that doesn't look right, and I think I can. A sudden sharp crackling sound interrupted her, followed by a yelp of pain. Alera, Xyler barked, his scales darkening in an instinctive threat display despite the fact that she couldn't see him. Report. Silence. JNIS, what's happening? Xyler demanded. I'm detecting an electrical discharge in the human's vicinity. The AI responded, its typically sardonic tone replaced by something resembling concern. Her vital signs show minor trauma consistent with a moderate shock. I'm okay. Alera's voice finally came through, sounding shaky but determined. Just a little surprise from your backup power coupling. Nothing a human from Earth can't handle. We practically evolved alongside electricity. Well, Not literally, but you know what I mean. Xyler found himself caught between relief and exasperation, an emotional combination he was entirely unfamiliar with. Exit the conduit immediately. That's an order. Almost done, Elara replied cheerfully, as if being ordered around by a massive reptilian security chief, while stuck in a dangerously malfunctioning air duct, was an everyday occurrence. Just one more. Got it. Suddenly, the monitoring equipment lit up with readings that caused the engineers to emit sounds of disbelief. Full system restoration, JNIS. Announced. Filtration operating at 103% of standard efficiency. 103, one of the engineers repeated. That's not possible. The system is capped at 100% for power conservation. I made a few adjustments, Elara's voice explained, now moving back toward them based on the changing echo patterns. Your system was actually throttling itself unnecessarily. A small recalibration of the flow regulators gives you better efficiency without any additional power draw. Xyler stared at the access panel, barely noticing that the gathered crowd had grown considerably, with beings from across the station coming to witness the unusual spectacle. Finally, a pair of small hands emerged from the opening, followed by Elara's dust-covered face. She looked exhausted but triumphant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and a streak of something that might have been mechanical oil across one cheek. Xyler reached down and, with unexpected gentleness, helped pull her the rest of the way out. She stood on shaky legs, looked up at the towering security chief, and gave him a tired smile. "See," she said, "sometimes being small isn't so bad." For the first time since anyone on X-12 could remember, Xyler's permanent scowl softened ever so slightly. "You," he said, in a tone that might almost be described as not completely intimidating, "are an unexpected asset." Coming from the Cthar security chief, this was practically a flowery speech of praise. The crowd murmured in astonishment. "Thanks," Elara replied, brushing ineffectively at the grime covering her clothes. She looked around at the gathering of aliens, many of whom were regarding her with new interest. "So, does this mean I'm not confined to quarters anymore?" Xyler made a sound that, had it come from any other being, might have been mistaken for a chuckle. "You would likely find a way out regardless." He straightened to his full imposing height and addressed the crowd. "Return to your activities. The situation is resolved." As the gathering began to disperse, Xyler looked down at Elara again. "You will be assigned appropriate quarters and limited station access, pending full background verification." His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you will explain your actual purpose here." Elara's smile widened. "Deal. But first, any chance of getting something to eat? Saving critical station infrastructure works up quite an appetite." JS's voice emanated from a nearby speaker. "I have taken the liberty of identifying several food vendors whose offerings are compatible with human physiology. Though I should warn you, the closest approximation to Earth cuisine currently available is the Grendalian fungal protein cubes, which one human visitor previously described as tasting like sadness and old socks." "Sounds delicious," Elara said with a laugh. "Lead the way." As they moved through the corridor, Xyler walking deliberately slowly to accommodate Elara's much shorter stride, the security chief found himself pondering a deeply troubling question. Was he beginning to like this tiny, fragile human? The strange duo had barely reached the food concourse when JNIS interrupted their progress with an urgent announcement. "Security Chief Xyler, your presence is requested immediately in Diplomatic Hub 3. The Valerian delegation has arrived ahead of schedule and is expressing displeasure at the reception arrangements." Xyler emitted a low growl. The Valerians were notoriously particular about ceremonial protocols, and their delegation was one of the most important to visit X-12 in recent cycles. They were rumored to be carrying an ancient artifact containing a prophecy of urgent importance regarding the stability of a nearby nebula, information that could affect multiple star systems and countless lives. "Understood," he responded. He looked down at Elara, who was watching him with undisguised curiosity. After a moment's consideration, he made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "You will accompany me." Alera's eyebrows shot up in surprise. To a diplomatic meeting? Are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, I just crawled through your air ducts and looked like I lost a fight with an oil tanker. The Volarians value authenticity over appearances, Xyler stated, already moving toward the nearest transport tube. And you have demonstrated useful insights. That's the nicest thing you've said to me yet, Alera remarked, hurrying to keep up with his long strides. Though I'm starting to think that in Cthar terms, that was practically a love poem. Xyler's scales rippled in what might have been the Cthar equivalent of an eye roll. The Volarians are a complex species. They communicate through layered meanings and often speak in riddles and prophecies. Their technology is based on what they call soul energy, phenomena that our scientists have yet to fully explain. Soul energy? Alera repeated, sounding fascinated. Like psychic powers. A crude but not entirely inaccurate comparison, Xyler conceded as they entered the transport tube. Diplomatic Hub 3, he commanded, and the tube began to move rapidly through the station. Sci-Fi, bring me. Alera asked. I don't know anything about Volarians or diplomatic protocols. Xyler was silent for a moment, seeming almost uncomfortable. Finally, he said, see things differently. This may be valuable. Before Alera could respond to this unexpected compliment, the transport tube slowed to a stop and the doors opened to reveal a scene of elegant chaos. Diplomatic Hub 3 had been transformed. The usually stark, functional space now glittered with strange crystalline structures that emitted soft, pulsating light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. The air was filled with a faint melodic hum that vibrated at the edge of hearing, and delicate mists swirled in complex formations that defied the station's artificial gravity. In the center of this ethereal display stood the Volarians. They were tall, willowy beings with translucent skin that rippled with bioluminescence in patterns that seemed to correspond with their emotions. Their limbs were long and fluid in movement, and they appeared to be wearing garments made of light itself, shifting and flowing around their forms. Several station officials were attempting to communicate with the leader of the delegation, a particularly luminous Volarian whose patterns were pulsing in what Alera somehow instinctively recognized as irritation. The ceremonial alignment is incorrect, the Volarian leader was saying, their voice melodic but clearly strained. The receptacle must be positioned in accordance with the fifth harmony, where the artifact cannot be safely revealed. We followed the specifications provided in your advanced communications. A flustered protocol officer was insisting, gesturing to what appeared to be an elaborate pedestal in the center of the room. The positioning was calculated precisely according to the station's gravitational metrics. You calculated without accounting for the soul resonance, another Volarian stated, their luminescence dimming in what might have been disappointment. A common error among non-sensitive species. Xyler stepped forward, his imposing presence immediately drawing all attention. I am Security Chief Xyler. How may we rectify this situation? The Volarian leader turned, their luminescence shifting through complex patterns before settling on a formal acknowledgement configuration. The security of the artifact is paramount. We require a properly attuned receptacle, and their patterns suddenly flickered and changed as they noticed Alera standing beside Xyler. You bring a child species to these proceedings? Alera, despite being somewhat intimidated by the ethereal beauty of the Volarians, couldn't help but bristle at being called a child species. I'm a fully grown human. Actually, she said, stepping forward with more confidence than she felt. And while we may be younger than some galactic civilizations, we've had our moments. Invented pizza, for one thing. That's got to count for something. The Volarians' patterns rippled in what might have been surprise or possibly amusement. It was hard to tell. The leader bent slightly, bringing their luminous face closer to Alera's level. Curious, they said, their voice taking on a different tone. You carry unusual resonances for one so physically limited. Before Alera could decide whether to be flattered or offended, J&S interrupted. If I may suggest, perhaps we could focus on the immediate issue of the artifact receptacle. The station's most skilled technicians are standing by to make any necessary adjustments. Your machines cannot sense what is needed, the Volarian leader said dismissively. The alignment must be felt, not measured. There was an awkward silence as the station officials exchanged helpless glances. Xyler's scales darkened slightly in what Alara was beginning to recognize as frustration. "May I ask a question?" Alara said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "This artifact you're carrying, it contains a prophecy about the nebula, right? Something important?" The Valerian's patterns shifted in a way that suggested caution. "The voices of the cosmos have entrusted us with crucial insights, yes. And you need to put it on that pedestal thing, but it needs to be, what, energetically aligned." Alara continued, gesturing vaguely. "Like it needs to be in harmony with something." A simplistic but not entirely incorrect interpretation. The Valerian leader allowed, their patterns showing increasing interest in this small being. Alara nodded thoughtfully. "On Earth, we have something similar. Well, not really similar, but conceptually related. Certain places have what some people call energy vortexes where they believe cosmic forces align. Most scientists dismiss it as nonsense, but..." She shrugged. "I've always thought there might be something to it that we just can't measure yet." The Valerian leader's patterns brightened considerably. "Perhaps your species is not as limited as appearance suggests." They gestured to one of their companions, who stepped forward carrying what looked like a small, ornate box that seemed to shift between multiple dimensions, never quite settling into a fixed shape. The artifact responds to consciousness resonance. If the receptacle is not properly aligned, the information cannot be safely accessed. Alara looked at the strange box with undisguised fascination. "Can I?" she asked, gesturing toward it. The Volarians exchanged what appeared to be a silent communication through their light patterns. Finally, the leader nodded. "You may observe but do not touch. The energies are quite potent." Alara approached carefully, studying the shifting box from various angles. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It almost looks like it's breathing. It resonates with the cosmic pulse," the Volarian holding it explained. "All existence vibrates in patterns. Most species perceive only the physical manifestations, but there are deeper harmonies." As Alara leaned closer, something unexpected happened. The box's dimensional shifting suddenly accelerated, its form blurring and then stabilizing into a more defined shape. A soft, melodic tone emanated from it, rising and falling in what sounded almost like a question. The Valerian's light patterns flashed in what was unmistakably shock. "Impossible," the leader whispered, their voice vibrating with intensity. "It responds to her." Xyler stepped forward protectively, his massive form tensing. "Explain." "The artifact recognizes resonant consciousness," another Valerian explained, their patterns pulsing rapidly. "It has never responded to any species other than our own." All eyes turned to Alara, who looked as surprised as everyone else. "I didn't do anything," she said quickly. "I was just looking at it." "Perhaps," Janice suggested, its synthetic voice somehow conveying both scientific curiosity and caution. "This unexpected interaction might provide a solution to our immediate problem." The Valerian leader studied Alara intensely, their luminescence shifting through complex patterns. Finally, they seemed to reach a decision. "The human will assist with the alignment." It wasn't a request. Alara glanced up at Xyler, who gave her what might have been the Cthar equivalent of a reassuring nod, basically a slightly less intimidating scowl. "Okay," she said, turning back to the Valerians. "What do I need to do?" What followed was one of the strangest experiences of Alara's life. Under the guidance of the Valerians, she was positioned near the pedestal, instructed to close her eyes, and asked to simply feel the flows. For several minutes, she stood there feeling increasingly foolish as the Valerians moved around her, speaking in musical tones too quiet to understand. Just as she was about to open her eyes and admit defeat, she felt something, a subtle vibration that seemed to pass through her rather than around her. It was similar to the sensation of a distant bass sound felt in the chest, but somehow more Directional. I think I feel something, she murmured, keeping her eyes closed. Like a current, but not physical. It's moving. That way. She pointed slightly to her left. The Volarians conferred in their musical language. Then Alara felt their presence, moving the pedestal carefully in the direction she had indicated. Continue, the leader instructed. For the next hour, through a process of subtle perceptions and adjustments that Alara could never have explained logically, the pedestal was positioned with increasingly precise alignment. Throughout the process, the artifact continued to emit occasional tones that seemed to confirm they were on the right track. Finally, when Alara felt a sudden sensation like everything clicking into place, the artifact emitted a sustained, harmonious tone that made everyone in the room feel momentarily weightless. The alignment is complete, the Volarian leader announced, their patterns glowing with what appeared to be satisfaction and lingering surprise. The artifact can now be safely activated. As Alara stepped back, feeling oddly drained but exhilarated, she noticed Xyler watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. If she didn't know better, she might have thought it was respect. The Volarian carrying the artifact stepped forward and carefully placed it on the now properly aligned pedestal. As it settled into place, the dimensional shifting of the box slowed and then stopped entirely, its form solidifying into a crystalline dodecahedron that glowed with an inner light. We will now reveal the prophecy, the Volarian leader announced, addressing the gathered station officials and Xyler. It concerns matters of grave importance to all who dwell in this sector of space. The leader placed their hands above the artifact, not quite touching it, and began to intone a melodic sequence. The glow within the crystal intensified, and suddenly the air above it shimmered and filled with what looked like a three-dimensional star map. The Whispering Nebula, JNIS, identified quietly, located approximately 2.3 light-years from this station. The projected image zoomed in on the nebula, revealing swirling clouds of gas and stellar matter. As they watched, the peaceful swirls began to distort, collapsing inward and then exploding outward in a visual representation that made everyone instinctively step back. The nebula's harmony is fracturing, the Volarian leader explained, their voice grave. What you are seeing is a cosmic event that our seers have predicted will occur within 17 cycles. The destruction will release energy waves capable of disrupting space-time throughout this sector. The station's shields cannot withstand a disruption of that magnitude, JNIS calculated aloud, nor can most of the inhabited systems in this region. Is evacuation possible? Xyler asked, practical as always. The Volarian leader's patterns dimmed. The affected area is too vast for complete evacuation. Billions would be displaced, and many species cannot survive long-term space travel. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Alara stared at the projection, her mind racing. There has to be another solution, she said finally. Does the prophecy only show the disaster, or does it offer any guidance? The Volarians exchanged light patterns again. There is more, the leader admitted, but it is cryptic, as cosmic whispers often are. They gestured, and the projection changed to show symbols and patterns that meant nothing to Alara. It speaks of harmony restored through dissonance embraced, another Volarian translated. The smallest voice calling to the cosmic dance. Well, that's helpfully vague, Alara muttered, then quickly added, no offense to your cosmic voices. Prophecies rarely offer direct instructions, the Volarian leader said, apparently not offended. They illuminate possibilities, not certainties. Alara stepped closer to the projection, studying the symbols. This part here, she said, pointing to a recurring pattern. It looks like a wave interference pattern, like when two different frequencies interact. The Volarian's patterns brightened with interest. You perceive the pattern of convergence. Yes, it suggests that opposing forces, properly aligned, might counteract the nebula's collapse. Like noise-canceling technology, Alara suggested. On Earth, we use opposing sound waves to neutralize unwanted noise. If you broadcast a sound that's exactly opposite to the sound you want to eliminate, they cancel each other out. A primitive but conceptually relevant analogy. One of the Valerians agreed, their patterns showing something like academic interest. The principle might be applied on a cosmic scale, using energy fields rather than mere acoustic waves. Could the station generate such fields? Zyler asked, looking to J&IS. Negative, the AI responded immediately. Current technology cannot produce energy manipulations of sufficient scope or precision. The discussion continued for hours, with the station's best scientists and engineers being called in to consult. Various solutions were proposed and dismissed as impossible or insufficient. Throughout it all, Ilera listened intently, occasionally asking questions that the others found either brilliantly insightful or completely irrelevant. There seemed to be no middle ground. As the gathering began to lose steam, Ilera suddenly spoke up again. What about combining technologies? The Valerians' soul energy stuff with more conventional science. The suggestion was met with skepticism from both sides. The Valerians insisted that their energetic techniques required specialized consciousness training that other species lacked, while the station scientists argued that mixing established technology with unquantifiable, mystical practices was methodologically unsound. But that's exactly what the prophecy is talking about, isn't it? Ilera persisted. Harmony through dissonance. Different approaches working together. The Valerians deal with consciousness and energy patterns we can't measure, while station technology can manipulate physical forces the Valerians can't generate. What if both are needed? The Valerian leader's patterns shifted thoughtfully. The human's interpretation has merit. The pattern of convergence does suggest unlikely combinations. And the smallest voice calling to the cosmic dance could refer to making contact with the nebula itself. Ilera continued, warming to her theory. If it's disrupted by some kind of energetic imbalance, maybe it needs to be, I don't know, reminded of its natural pattern. As the discussion evolved into a tentative plan involving Valerian energetic techniques, combined with the station's most powerful field generators, Zyler found himself watching Ilera with growing amazement. This tiny human, who had appeared out of nowhere just days ago, was now at the center of efforts to prevent a catastrophe that threatened billions of lives. When a meeting finally concluded, with agreements to begin immediate preparations for a joint Valerian station effort to address the nebula's instability, the Valerian leader approached Ilera directly. You perceive patterns others miss, they said, their luminescence forming what appeared to be a formal recognition configuration. We would name you a Cosmos listener, a rare designation among our people, never before granted to another species. Ilera blushed, clearly both honored and embarrassed by the attention. I just asked some questions, she said modestly. The solutions are coming from all of you. As they left the diplomatic hub, Zyler walked beside Ilera in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke, his deep voice unusually quiet. You are not what you appear to be. Ilera glanced up at him, a small smile playing at her lips. I could say the same about you, you know. Everyone sees this terrifying Cthar security chief, but I've noticed you actually care deeply about protecting the station and its people. Zyler's scales rippled in what might have been embarrassment. After another moment of silence, he said something that surprised even himself. You did well today, kid. The nickname slipped out unintentionally, a far more casual form of address than Zyler had ever used with anyone under his command, let alone a strange human who had appeared without authorization. Yet somehow it felt right. Ilera's smile widened into a grin. Thanks, big guy. So, does this mean I'm officially not a security threat anymore? Zyler made a sound that was definitely, unmistakably, a chuckle, causing a passing station crew member to nearly walk into a wall in shock. Let's say your status has been upgraded to useful nuisance, he replied. I'll take it, Ilera laughed. Now, about that food you promised me earlier? Saving the galaxy from a nebula catastrophe works up quite an appetite. As they headed toward the nearest food concourse, neither of them realized that they had taken the first steps toward a friendship that would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. The next 12 days passed in a blur of activity. The impending nebula crisis had moved from theoretical concern to top priority, with resources from across the station being diverted to the Joint Valerian Station Project, now officially designated Nebula Harmony Initiative. Alara found herself unexpectedly central to the effort. Though she lacked the scientific expertise of the station's top researchers or the esoteric knowledge of the Valerians, her unique ability to grasp both perspectives and translate between them proved invaluable. She became an unofficial liaison, moving between technical meetings and Valerian meditation chambers, helping to bridge conceptual gaps that had initially seemed insurmountable. Xyler, ostensibly involved due to security concerns around the massive energy manipulations being planned, found himself increasingly impressed by the tiny human stamina and adaptability. He had begun accompanying her not just out of duty, but because her perspective consistently challenged his own rigid thinking. The problem, Alara was explaining to a mixed group of station engineers and Valerian energy shapers, is that we're still thinking of these as two separate systems that need to be synchronized instead of components of a single integrated approach. She was standing on a hovering platform to be visible to the gathered team in the station's largest laboratory, where a complex array of equipment had been assembled. Xyler stood nearby, arms crossed but attentive. The Valerian energy patterns are based on consciousness resonance, which we can't directly measure with station equipment, she continued, but they produce effects in real space that we can detect. We need to use those effect signatures as the interface point. Like a translation matrix, one of the engineers suggested, his six-limbed form gesticulating excitedly. Exactly, Alara beamed. The station's field generators can then amplify and project those translated patterns toward the nebula. The Valerian energy shapers conferred in their musical language before one spoke. The concept has merit, but the precision required would be extraordinary. Even our most skilled shapers cannot maintain the necessary patterns indefinitely. We don't need indefinitely, Alara countered. According to both the prophecy and Iness's calculations, we just need to establish the harmonic pattern long enough for the nebula's natural stability to reassert itself. Think of it like jump-starting an engine, not replacing it. The discussion continued, increasingly technical but also increasingly hopeful as genuine progress was made. When the meeting concluded, Xyler walked Alara back toward her quarters, noting that she was swaying slightly with exhaustion. "You need rest," he stated bluntly. "I'm fine," Alara insisted, stifling a yawn. "Just need to check on a calibration test from the—" "Rest," Xyler repeated, this time in a tone that brooked no argument. "The project will fail if its key component collapses from exhaustion." Alara looked up at him with surprise. "Key component? Me? I'm just helping everyone communicate better." Xyler made a dismissive sound. "You underestimate your contribution. The Valerians respond to you in ways they respond to no other non-Valerian. The engineers implement your crazy ideas that they would dismiss from anyone else. Even JNIS has allocated additional processing resources to your requests." "Well, when you put it that way, I sound pretty important," Alara laughed, though the sound was tired. "Fine, I'll rest. But wake me if anything critical happens." As they reached her quarters, Xyler hesitated, then said, "Your species is physically fragile, yet you demonstrate remarkable resilience." Coming from the Cthar security chief, this was high praise indeed. Alara smiled up at him. "Thanks, big guy. Your species is physically terrifying, yet you demonstrate remarkable softness." Xyler's scales darkened in what Alara now recognized as embarrassment. "Rest," he growled, turning to leave. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The alarm jolted Alara from a deep sleep at what station time designated as 0347 hours. JNS's voice filled her quarters, uncharacteristically urgent. "Alara, your immediate presence is requested in Command Center Alpha. Nebula destabilization has accelerated exponentially. Current projections indicate catastrophic collapse within 9 hours." Fully awake in an instant, Alara scrambled to dress. "What happened?" Yesterday's models gave us at least 2 more weeks. Unknown trigger event, JNIS. Responded. The Valerians are attempting to communicate with the nebula directly, but report chaotic dissonance overwhelming the harmonic matrix. Tell them I'm on my way, Alara said, rushing out the door, only to nearly collide with Xyler, who was clearly about to signal for entry. You've been informed, he stated, taking in her disheveled but ready appearance. The nebula's collapsing, she confirmed grimly. 9 hours. Without another word, Xyler fell into step beside her as they hurried toward the command center. The station corridors were in controlled chaos, with crew members rushing to emergency stations and civilians being directed to secure areas. When they arrived at Command Center Alpha, the scene was one of tense activity. The station's highest-ranking officials were gathered around a massive holographic display showing the nebula in real time. The beautiful swirls of cosmic gas were now visibly distorted, with violent energy flares erupting from its core. The Valerian leaders stood apart, their luminescence pulsing in patterns that somehow conveyed deep distress even to non-Valerians. As Alara approached, they turned to her. The cosmic harmony shatters faster than foretold, they said, their melodic voice strained. Our attempts to establish resonance are failing. The dissonance is too great. What changed? Alara asked, studying the holographic display. Why the sudden acceleration? Unknown. The station commander, a tall, multi-limbed being named Director Thaxel, responded. Our sensors detected what might have been a significant energy surge within the nebula approximately 6 hours ago, but the readings were inconclusive. Could it have been a natural phenomenon? Alara asked. A microsingularity or stellar remnant passing through. Possible, JNIS. Acknowledged, though the probability calculations favor an artificial catalyst. Artificial, Xyler's voice sharpened. You suggest sabotage? Insufficient data for that conclusion, JNIS. Clarified. However, the energy signature contains regularities inconsistent with known natural phenomena. The implications hung heavy in the air, but there was no time to investigate further. Director Thaxel called the group to attention. Regardless of cause, we face imminent crisis. The collapse will generate a space-time disruption wave that will reach X-12 in approximately 9 hours and 15 minutes. Standard evacuation protocols cannot be completed in that time frame. The Harmony Initiative? Alara asked urgently. Components are ready, one of the chief engineers reported, but the accelerated timeline means we've lost our testing phase. And without the Valerians' ability to establish initial resonance with the nebula, the technology is essentially useless. All eyes turned to the Valerian leader, who dimmed in what appeared to be resignation. The dissonance overwhelms our consciousness projection. We cannot establish sufficient connection. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Alara stared at the holographic nebula, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. What if, she said slowly, an idea forming, we reverse our approach? Instead of trying to impose harmony from outside, what if we adapt to the dissonance itself? The Valerian leader's patterns shifted in confusion. Explain. In music theory on Earth, there's something called dissonant harmony, using clash and tension as part of the composition rather than trying to eliminate it, Alara explained, gesturing animatedly. What if instead of fighting against the nebula's current chaotic state, we work with it? Create a harmonic bubble that matches its dissonance but gradually shifts toward stability? The Valerians conferred rapidly in their musical language, their patterns fluctuating with what appeared to be excitement and uncertainty in equal measure. Theoretically possible, their leader finally admitted, but it would require a consciousness anchor capable of adapting to extreme dissonance without losing coherence. None of our shapers are trained for such techniques. Could multiple consciousnesses work together? Alara suggested. A team approach? The Valerian leader's patterns dimmed. The coordination required would be beyond our capabilities under such time constraints. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. The station's best scientists and the Volarians' most skilled consciousness shapers together couldn't solve the problem in time. Billions of lives across multiple star systems hung in the balance. Alara took a deep breath, looking from the holographic nebula to the Volarians to Xyler, who watched her with an unreadable expression. And she spoke the words that would change everything. "I'll do it." All attention snapped to her. "Impossible," the Volarian leader stated immediately. "You have no training in consciousness projection or energy shaping." "But I can sense the patterns," Alara countered. "I help align the artifact. I've been working between your techniques and the station's technology for days. And most importantly, I have no preconceptions about how it's supposed to work. I can adapt." "The energetic stress would be enormous," another Volarian warned. "Even for trained shapers, prolonged exposure to such dissonance can cause permanent harm." "What kind of harm?" Xyler interjected sharply. The Volarians exchanged uncomfortable patterns. "Consciousness fragmentation, permanent perceptual distortion. In extreme cases, complete neural dissolution." "Absolutely not," Xyler growled, scales darkening to near black. "Find another solution." "There is no other solution," Alara said quietly, meeting his fierce gaze. "Not in the time we have." Director Thaxel stepped forward. "The risk is unacceptable. We cannot ask any individual to sacrifice themselves this way." "You're not asking," Alara pointed out. "I'm offering. And with all due respect, Director, this isn't just about X-12. It's about entire star systems, billions of lives." The command center erupted into heated debate. Various alternatives were proposed and dismissed as impractical within the time frame. Throughout it all, Alara remained calm, her eyes frequently returning to the holographic nebula, watching as the disruption patterns grew visibly worse with each passing minute. Finally, she raised her voice to cut through the arguments. "We're wasting time we don't have. I'm doing this. The only question is whether you're going to help me do it right, or if I need to figure it out myself." There was a moment of stunned silence, broken by a sound no one expected: Xyler's laugh. It was a short, grim sound, but unmistakably appreciative. "The small one has courage," he said, addressing the room, but looking directly at Alara with what could only be described as pride. "If this is to be done, it will be done with every possible protection and support." The authority in his voice seemed to settle the matter. Director Thaxel nodded reluctantly and began issuing orders to prepare the Harmony Initiative equipment for immediate deployment. The Volarian leader approached Alara, their luminescence forming patterns more complex than any she had seen before. "If you truly commit to this path, we will provide what guidance we can. But you must understand, once the process begins, you will be largely alone. We cannot follow where you must go." "Understand," Alara said, with more confidence than she felt. She glanced up at Xyler. "I won't be completely alone, though." The massive Kthar security chief inclined his head slightly. "Not while I draw breath." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. The Harmony Initiative equipment was moved to a specialized chamber designed to amplify and project the energetic patterns Alara would theoretically generate. The Volarians provided crash course training in basic consciousness techniques, while station engineers made final adjustments to the technology interface. Throughout it all, Xyler remained at Alara's side, silently supportive but radiating a protective intensity that even the most senior officials didn't dare challenge. As the deadline approached, Alara was led to a central platform within the chamber. Various sensors and interface devices were attached to her head and hands, while a semi-transparent dome was lowered to surround her. "The dome will help focus your consciousness projection and provide some buffering against feedback," a Volarian explained. "The interface devices will translate your patterns into signals the station's field generators can amplify and direct toward the nebula." Director Thaxel approached, looking grave. "Final projections give us 8 minutes before the nebula reaches critical collapse. Once that happens, no intervention will be possible." He hesitated, then added, "You can still withdraw. We have begun limited evacuations of the most vulnerable populations." 8 minutes isn't enough to save everyone, Ilera said firmly. We stick to the plan. The director nodded respectfully and stepped back. The Valerian leader came. For next, their pattern solemn. Remember the techniques. Find the underlying pattern within the chaos. Do not resist the dissonance. Flow with it. Then gradually introduce stabilizing elements. They touched a hand briefly to the dome. Your consciousness is stronger than you know, Cosmos listener. Finally, Xyler approached. For a moment, the fearsome Cthar security chief seemed at a loss for words. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he placed one massive taloned hand against the dome and spoke in a voice that managed to be both fierce and gentle. Little brother, he said, using a term that made several Cthar present gasp in shock. Return safely. Ilera's eyes widened at the term, though she didn't understand its significance. She nodded, pressing her own small hand against the dome opposite Xyler's giant one. I'll do my best, big guy. With final preparations complete, the chamber was cleared of all personnel except for the essential operators. The Valerians took positions around the outer edge of the room, entering meditative states to provide what support they could from a distance. The station's top scientists monitored an array of complex equipment, initiating Harmony sequence in 3, 2, 1. JNS announced. The dome around Ilera began to hum, and strange lights played across its surface. She closed her eyes as instructed, focusing on her breathing and attempting to clear her mind as the Valerians had taught her. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, she became aware of a presence, vast, ancient, and profoundly alien. The nebula's consciousness, if it could be called that, unfolded in her mind like a map of impossible dimensions. And it was screaming. Pain, confusion, and disruption roiled through patterns that should have been harmonious. The dissonance was overwhelming, threatening to shatter Ilera's sense of self into countless fragments. She gasped, instinctively trying to pull back, but the connection was already established. Vital signs spiking, someone called out, their voice seeming to come from impossibly far away. Neural activity off the charts. She's rejecting the connection, a Valerian voice observed. The dissonance is too great. Ilera. This voice was closer somehow, cutting through the chaos. Xyler's unmistakable rumble. You are stronger than this. Find a pattern. Clinging to that familiar voice like an anchor, Ilera forced herself to stop resisting. Instead of trying to impose order on the nebula's chaotic consciousness, she let herself experience it fully. The dissonance was still overwhelming, but now, instead of fighting against it, she began to perceive structure within the chaos. Complex, multidimensional, but definitely there. Pattern detected, JNIS. Reported. Extraordinary complexity, but consistent internal logic. The human is establishing connection. Field generators responding. An engineer called. Energy projection initializing. Inside the dome, Ilera was only dimly aware of the activity around her. Her consciousness was increasingly merged with the nebula's vast, strange awareness. She could feel its pain, its fundamental patterns torn and twisted by whatever had triggered the accelerated collapse. Following instinct more than training, she began to adapt her own consciousness to match the nebula's dissonant state. Rather than attempting to impose the original harmonic structure the Valerians had planned, she worked with what actually existed now, acknowledging the disruption while gently introducing elements that resonated with the nebula's deeper, more fundamental patterns. It was like trying to conduct an orchestra where every instrument was playing in a different key and tempo, gradually bringing them into alignment not by forcing them to play the same notes, but by finding the harmonics that connected their disparate sounds. In the monitoring room, the scientists and engineers watched in amazement as the readings stabilized, then began to show clear evidence of feedback between the station's field generators and the nebula itself. The disruption pattern is shifting, one of the scientists reported incredulously. Energy dispersion is becoming more organized. The Valerian leader, emerging partially from their meditative state, observed with luminescence pulsing in what appeared to be awe. She is not imposing harmony. She is finding it within the chaos itself. Extraordinary. Xyler, who had refused to leave despite protocol, stood watching the dome where Alara sat motionless, her expression peaceful despite the sweat beading on her forehead and the occasional tremors that ran through her small frame. Time to critical collapse. Director Thaxel demanded. Holding steady at 7 minutes, JNIS reported. No further acceleration detected. However, the human's neural patterns show signs of increasing strain. Estimated consciousness coherence time remaining 12 minutes. The implications were clear. Alara might be able to stabilize the nebula, but the process could destroy her mind before completion. Can we assist her? Reduce the neural load somehow? The director asked urgently. The Volarians conferred briefly, not without disrupting the delicate connection she has established. Any intervention now could trigger the very collapse we seek to prevent. Xyler growled, a sound of pure frustration. There must be something. Inside the connection, Alara was barely maintaining her sense of self. The nebula's vastness threatened to swallow her consciousness completely as she worked to guide its chaotic energies toward a more stable configuration. She could feel it beginning to respond, ancient patterns reasserting themselves, but the process was slow, too slow. She was losing coherence. Her thoughts scattered and reformed with increasing difficulty. Memories began to blend with the nebula's alien awareness. She couldn't remember if she was Alara or the nebula or something in between. Then, cutting through the chaos like a beacon, little brother, Xyler's voice, somehow reaching her across the void. The Cthar is attempting direct neural contact through the interface, a scientist reported, sounding alarmed. The feedback could be dangerous. Let him try, the Volarian leader commanded, their patterns showing sudden understanding. He provides an anchor. Within the maelstrom of merged consciousness, Alara clung to that voice, that unexpected term of, what? Respect? Affection? From the fearsome Cthar security chief who had initially seen her as nothing but a security breach. With renewed focus, she redoubled her efforts, working with the nebula's patterns more efficiently now. The chaotic energies began to flow more smoothly, finding their natural channels again. The disruption that had threatened collapse began to dissipate. Critical collapse threshold receding, JNIS. Announced. Estimated time to nebula stabilization, 4 minutes, 20 seconds. The human's neural patterns? Director Thaxel asked. Deteriorating, but at a reduced rate. Estimated consciousness coherence time remaining, 6 minutes. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. It would be close, but possible. Inside the connection, Alara guided the final phases of stabilization. The nebula's consciousness, no longer screaming in pain, began to respond more harmoniously to her efforts. She could sense gratitude, or something like it, emanating from the ancient cosmic entity. As the last critical energy patterns settled into stable configurations, Alara felt herself beginning to slip away. She had given too much, stretched her consciousness too thin. The connection was complete, the nebula saved, but she couldn't find her way back to herself. In her fading awareness, she heard Xyler's voice again, not just calling, but demanding, "Return, little brother. Your task is complete." With the last of her strength, she followed that voice home. The dome surrounding Alara deactivated with a soft hiss. She slumped forward immediately, unconscious but breathing steadily. Xyler was at her side in an instant, carefully removing the interface devices from her head and hands, his massive talons surprisingly gentle. Neural readings stabilizing, one of the medical officers reported. Consciousness patterns reintegrating. She's going to need significant recovery time, but there's no indication of permanent damage. The nebula? Director Thaxel asked, turning to the main display. Fully stabilized, JNIS. Confirmed. All disruption patterns have resolved. The space-time distortion wave has dissipated completely. The room erupted in cheers and the equivalent of cheers from species that expressed jubilation in other ways. The Valerian's luminescence brightened to near-blinding intensity in patterns of celebration and wonder. Xyler, oblivious to the commotion, carefully lifted Alera's unconscious form. She looked impossibly small and fragile in his massive arms. "She requires medical attention," he stated, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Of course, Director Thaxel agreed immediately. "Our finest medical facilities are already prepared." As Xyler carried Alera from the chamber, the Valerian leader stepped into his path, their luminescence forming a pattern of formal respect. "You called her little brother," they observed, their voice carrying no judgment, only curiosity. Xyler met their gaze steadily. "Yes. Among the Cthar, this term is reserved for those considered true battle companions, regardless of size or species. It is your highest form of respect and kinship." The Valerian's pattern shifted. No Cthar in recorded history has ever bestowed this title on a non-Cathar. "No non-Cathar in recorded history has earned it," Xyler replied simply, continuing past them toward the medical bay. 3 days later, Alera awoke in the medical center, feeling as though she'd simultaneously slept for a year and run a marathon. Her mind was fuzzy, full of strange impressions and half-remembered sensations from her connection with the nebula. She became aware of a massive presence beside her bed and turned her head to see Xyler, sitting in what had to be the largest chair the medical center could provide, apparently reviewing security reports on a datapad. Despite his attempt to appear casually occupied, the slight tension in his posture suggested he'd been keeping vigil. "Did we win?" Alera asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Xyler's head snapped up, his reptilian eyes focusing on her with unexpected intensity. For a brief moment, something that might almost be called emotion crossed his usually impassive features. "The nebula is stable," he confirmed, setting aside the datapad. "All threatened systems are secure." "Good," Alera said weakly. "That's good." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun around her. "The medical officers advise minimal movement for another day," Xyler informed her, a hint of what might have been concern in his rumbling voice. "Your consciousness was severely strained by the connection." "I feel like I've been hit by a transport ship," Alera admitted, settling back. After a moment, she added hesitantly, "I remember hearing your voice when I was lost in there. You call me something, little brother." Xyler's scales darkened slightly in what she now recognized as embarrassment. He was silent for so long that Alera thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "Among my kind, it is a term of respect for one who has fought alongside you and proven their worth beyond question." "Oh," Alera said, surprisingly touched. "Thank you. It is not given lightly," Xyler added, his voice gruff. "In fact, the station has been in something of an uproar over it. No Cthar has ever." He stopped abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with discussing the matter further. Alera smiled faintly. "Well, I'm honored. And for what it's worth, you're the best big, scary, overprotective alien brother a girl could ask for." The fearsome security chief made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Before he could respond further, the door slid open to admit Director Thaxel, the Valerian leader, and several other high-ranking station officials. "Ah, our hero awakens," Director Thaxel announced, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling, Alera?" "Like I arm-wrestled a nebula and barely won," she replied with a weak smile. "But I'll be okay." The Valerian leader stepped forward, their luminescence forming patterns that somehow conveyed both formality and warmth. The Cosmos listener returns to herself. "We're gratified." What followed was a somewhat overwhelming series of expressions of gratitude, explanations of the nebula's current state, fully stabilized, with no sign of future disruption, and, to Alera's considerable surprise, an official offer. "The station council has unanimously voted to create a new position," Director Thaxel explained. "Cross-species innovation liaison. Your unique ability to bridge different technological and philosophical approaches proved invaluable. We would be honored if you would consider accepting this role permanently. Alara blinked in astonishment. You want me to stay? Officially, with full station citizenship and resources for your work, the director confirmed. Though I should note that Security Chief Zyler has insisted on maintaining certain protective oversight. Alara glanced at Zyler, who managed to look both stern and slightly embarrassed. He's worried I'll crawl into more dangerous ducks if left unsupervised, isn't he? A not unreasonable concern, J&IS. Interjected through a nearby speaker, its synthetic voice drier than ever. My damage projection algorithms experience what could only be described as digital anxiety whenever you approach station infrastructure. Everyone laughed. Even Zyler made a sound that could charitably be interpreted as amused. The days following Alara's recovery were filled with ceremonies, debriefings, and preparations for a new role. The Valerians, before departing, gifted her with a small crystalline device that they claimed would help her further develop her consciousness resonance abilities, though they warned it might occasionally play what sounded suspiciously like cosmic hold music. X-12 itself seemed to change in subtle ways. The rigid species segregation that had previously defined much of station life began to relax as the story of how a tiny human, a fearsome Kthar, ethereal Valerians, and practical station engineers had worked together to save billions spread throughout the community. New collaborative projects emerged, often with Alara serving as the catalyst or facilitator. Zyler, while maintaining his intimidating presence as security chief, became known for an unexpected openness to unconventional approaches, provided they didn't explicitly violate security protocols. J&IS developed what some swore was a genuine sense of humor, though the AI neither confirmed nor denied this evolution. One evening, about a month after the Nebula crisis, Alara and Zyler stood in one of the station's observation lounges, looking out at the stars. The Whispering Nebula was visible as a distant, shimmering cloud, now peacefully glowing with stable energy patterns. I never told you why I came to X-12 in the first place, Alara said suddenly. Zyler turned his massive head to regard her. Your initial arrival was unauthorized. The question became irrelevant after your contributions. Still, I'd like you to know. She smiled up at him. I was looking for something remarkable. Earth is wonderful, but